I never imagined that the day I buried my husband would also be the day I realized how completely my life had been taken from me. The chapel smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, a scent I knew I would never be able to forget. It clung to everything, the air, my clothes, even my thoughts. I stood just inside the doorway, my hand trembling slightly as I held onto the strap of my bag like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. 42 years. That's how long Daniel and I had been together. And now I was alone. People filled the room, dressed in black, their voices low and respectful. Some turned to look at me as I stepped inside. Their expressions blurred together, sympathy, curiosity, discomfort. I nodded politely to a few familiar faces, but I wasn't really seeing them. I was looking for my son. I spotted Mark near the front, seated beside his wife, Clara. His head was slightly bowed, his hands clasped together, but Clara sat upright, composed, almost regal. Even here, even now, she looked like she was attending an important business event rather than a funeral. There was an empty seat next to Mark. My seat. I began walking toward it, my steps slow but steady. I needed to sit beside my son. I needed to feel that I wasn't completely alone in this. But just as I reached the row, Clara stood up. Her movement was smooth, deliberate, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Anna," she said softly, though her voice carried enough for nearby people to hear. "That seat is reserved." I blinked, confused. Reserved? For whom? Her lips curved into a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. For immediate family. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood. "I am immediate family," I said quietly. "I'm his wife." She tilted her head slightly. "You were," she corrected gently. "Things are different now." The words hit harder than I expected. I felt the room shift, not physically, but in that subtle way where you know people are watching, listening, judging, waiting. I glanced at Mark.
He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything.
He just kept staring at the floor. Clara placed her handbag on the empty chair. A clear message. That seat was not for me. I felt heat rise to my face, but I forced myself to smile. Not for her, never for her, but for my own dignity. "Of course," I said softly. I stepped back and moved to the second row. Behind them, behind my own son. As I sat down, I heard whispers. "Did you see that? Poor Anna." She didn't even argue. I kept my eyes forward. Daniel always used to say, "Never give people the satisfaction of seeing you fall apart." So I didn't. But inside, something cracked. The service passed in a blur. Voices spoke, kind words about Daniel, about his generosity, his intelligence, his humor. People laughed softly at shared memories, wiped away tears, nodded in agreement. I barely heard any of it. All I could see was the back of Clara's head. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect control. She had been like that from the beginning. At first, it was small things, little comments disguised as jokes. "Oh, Anna, you still do things the old-fashioned way, don't you?" Or the way she would forget to invite me to dinners, or schedule events when she knew I couldn't attend. Daniel used to brush it off. "She's just trying to find her place," he would say. But I had seen it clearly. Clara didn't want to find her place. She wanted to take mine. After the service, everyone moved to the house. My house. The house Daniel and I had built together from nothing. But when I walked through the front door, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Clara was already there, giving instructions to caterers, greeting guests, accepting condolences, as if she were the widow. I stood near the entrance, unsure where to go. "Mom." I turned. Mark stood in front of me, looking tired, uneasy. "Are you okay?" he asked quickly. Before I could answer, Clara appeared at his side. "Mark, darling, We need to speak with Mr. Henderson about the arrangements. Then she looked at me. Anna, you must be exhausted. Why don't you rest upstairs? Her tone was polite. Too polite. I met her gaze. I'm fine, I said. I'll stay. Something flickered in her eyes. Irritation. Of course, she replied smoothly. For now.
For now.
Those two words settled heavily in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too empty. I walked through the room slowly, touching familiar things. The bookshelf Daniel built, the dining table we picked together, the small crack in the wall we always said we'd fix but never did. Every corner held a memory. Every memory reminded me that he was gone. And yet, something else lingered. A feeling, not grief, not exactly. Something sharper, a sense that everything was about to change. The next morning, I found Clara in the kitchen. She was already dressed, elegant as always, scrolling through her phone. You're up early, she said without looking at me. I couldn't sleep. I poured myself coffee. There was a pause. Then she spoke again. Mark and I have been discussing your situation. I froze. My situation? She finally looked at me.
Yes.
This house is quite large. It might be difficult for you to manage alone. I've managed it for decades. She smiled slightly. That was before.
Before.
Everything with her was about before and after. We've found a lovely community, she continued. Very comfortable. People your age. I'm not going anywhere. The words came out firmer than I expected. She blinked, surprised. Then her expression hardened. Well, she said coolly, we'll see what happens after the will reading.
Ah.
There it was. The real reason. She thought everything would belong to Mark. And through him, to her. I took a slow sip of my coffee. And for the first time since Daniel died, I smiled. Because Clara had no idea what was coming. 6 months ago, Daniel had taken me to his lawyer. He had been quiet that day. Serious. Just in case, he told me. I hadn't asked questions. I trusted him. Now, standing in my kitchen, watching Clara plan my future, like I was already gone, I finally understood. Daniel had seen everything. Every look, every word, every calculated move. And he had prepared. The will would be read in a few hours. Clara thought she had already won. But she hadn't. Not even close. And when the truth came out, she wouldn't just lose control. She would lose everything she thought was hers. I arrived at the lawyer's office 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I needed those quiet moments to steady myself. The building hadn't changed in years. The same glass doors, the same neutral walls, the same faint scent of old paper and polished furniture. Daniel had always joked that time moved slower in places like this, as if decisions made here were meant to last longer than people did. I sat in the waiting area, folding my hands in my lap, watching the clock tick with slow precision. Each second felt heavier than the last. This was it. Whatever Daniel had planned, whatever he had seen coming, it would all be revealed today. The door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it was them. Clara's heels clicked confidently against the floor, sharp and controlled. Mark followed, quieter, his steps hesitant. I glanced up just as they entered the room. Clara was dressed like she was attending a corporate negotiation, tailored black suit, minimal jewelry, hair perfectly arranged. She carried a leather folder tucked under her arm, like she expected to take notes on her new assets. Mark looked uncomfortable, his tie slightly loosened, his expression distant. Anna, Clara said with a polite nod, as if yesterday had been nothing more than a minor misunderstanding. I returned the nod. Clara. Mark hesitated before speaking. Mom, how are you holding up? There it was again, the question people ask when they don't really want an answer.
I'm Manatson, he replied.
He nodded, relieved that I hadn't made it complicated. We sat in silence for a moment. Clara checked her phone. Mark stared at the floor. I watched them both, seeing something I hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge before. Distance. Not just physical, but emotional. And it hadn't appeared overnight. Mr. Henderson entered shortly after, carrying a thick folder. He greeted us warmly, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that told me this wouldn't be a simple reading. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking his seat. "We'll begin." Clara leaned forward slightly, pen ready. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. "I will first note," he began, "that Daniel made significant revisions to his will approximately 6 months ago. These revisions were made with full legal capacity and documented thoroughly." I saw Clara's pen pause midair. Mark glanced at her briefly, then back at Mr. Henderson. We continued. To his brother, Michael, Daniel leaves his collection of antique watches and the sum of $30,000. A small, expected gesture. To his son, Mark, Clara straightened again, her attention sharpening. Daniel leaves his boat, his personal workshop equipment, and a financial trust totaling $250,000 to be distributed over a period of 5 years in equal installments. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Clara blinked. "Excuse me," she said, unable to stop herself. "Did you say installments?" Mr. Henderson didn't look up. "Yes." "Why not a direct transfer?" "Because that is how it was structured." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Mark looked confused. I said nothing. Mr. Henderson turned the page. "To my wife, Anna." The room shifted. Even the air seemed to change. "I leave full ownership of our residence, including all property within it. Additionally, I leave all personal savings, investment accounts, and controlling ownership of my company." Clara's pen slipped from her fingers. It hit the table with a soft, sharp sound. "No," she said under her breath. Then louder. "That can't be correct." Mr. Henderson looked at her calmly. "It is." Mark turned to me slowly, as if seeing me for the first time. "You're getting the company?" "I didn't know the details," I said quietly. "Daniel handled everything." Clara shook her head. "This doesn't make sense. Mark works there. He's been preparing to take over." Mr. Henderson finally met her eyes. Daniel addressed that in his documentation. He reached into the folder again. "There is also a personal letter." Clara leaned back, arms crossed. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Mr. Henderson unfolded the letter and began to read. "To my wife, Anna, you have always been the foundation of everything I built. Even when others overlooked your role, I never did. This is to ensure that you are protected, respected, and never placed in a position of dependency." My hands tightened in my lap. "To my son, Mark, I love you deeply. But I have watched with concern as you allowed distance to grow where there should have been loyalty. I hope this gives you time to reflect and find your way back." Mark's face paled. Clara's jaw tightened. "To Clara, I have observed your behavior closely over the years. Your attempts to isolate Anna, to diminish her influence, and to position yourself as the primary authority in this family have not gone unnoticed. I have taken measures to ensure that those efforts will not succeed." Clara shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous." Mr. Henderson continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "The structure of this will is intentional. It is designed to protect Anna and to prevent manipulation of both financial and personal matters after my passing." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You expect us to believe this? That he suddenly decided to cut his own son out?" "He did not cut him out," Mr. Henderson replied calmly. "He ensured boundaries." There was one final page. "And one additional condition. Mr. Henderson said. Clara went still. If Mark and Clara wished to remain in the residence, they must enter into a formal rental agreement at fair market value. Otherwise, they are required to vacate within 30 days. The room exploded. This is insane. Clara snapped. We live there. You reside there, Mr. Henderson corrected. Ownership is different. She turned to Mark. Say something. But Mark didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't defend her. He just stared at the table. I watched it all quietly.
No anger. No satisfaction.
Just clarity. Daniel had seen everything, and he had made sure I wouldn't be erased. Clara leaned toward me, her voice low and sharp. You think you've won, she said. You think this makes you important. I met her gaze. I think Daniel made his decision. Her eyes burned with anger. This isn't over. No, I said calmly. It isn't. As we stood to leave, Mark finally looked at me. Mom, I don't understand. You will, I said gently. Just not today. He nodded slowly. Clara walked ahead of him, already pulling out her phone, already planning her next move. But for the first time, she wasn't in control. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter, colder, clearer. I stood for a moment on the steps, letting it sink in. The house, the company, my life, still mine. And somewhere, I could almost hear Daniel's voice. Quiet.
Certain.
I told you, Anna. Timing is everything. When I walked back into the house that afternoon, the silence felt different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of grief anymore. It was something sharper, more alert, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. I closed the door behind me slowly, letting my hand rest on the handle for a moment longer than necessary. This house had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a battlefield that had finally revealed its rules. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The furniture stood where it always had. The light filtered through the same curtains. The faint scent of Daniel's cologne still lingered in the hallway. But then I noticed it. A drawer slightly open in the console table, a cabinet door not fully shut, a chair pushed just a little too far back. Small things, subtle things, but enough. I moved through the rooms quietly, my eyes catching more details with every step. My study, or what used to be mine, had been disturbed. Papers were slightly out of order. A folder that I always kept tucked beneath a stack of books was now shifted. In the bedroom, the jewelry box on my dresser was open, its contents not missing but clearly handled. Clara had been searching for something, or maybe she had simply needed to feel in control. I exhaled slowly and set my bag down. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in your bones after too much change, too much truth, too quickly. But I didn't sit. I didn't retreat. Not anymore. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on, more out of habit than need. The familiar routine steadied me. Water, cup, tea leaves. Simple actions that reminded me that some things were still mine to decide. The sound of the front door slamming broke the quiet. Heavy footsteps followed, fast, uneven, filled with something I didn't need to guess. Mark. He appeared in the doorway seconds later, his face flushed, his breathing slightly uneven as if he had rushed the entire way home. How could you do this? He demanded. I turned toward him slowly, keeping my voice calm. Do what, Mark? This. He gestured vaguely around him, frustration spilling out. The will, the company, everything. You turned him against us. There it was. Not confusion. Not grief.
Blame.
I didn't turn anyone against anyone, I said evenly. Your father made his own decisions. That's not what Clara says. He shot back immediately. Of course it wasn't. I studied him for a moment, really looked at him, the tension in his shoulders, The way his eyes avoided mine just slightly, the way his words came out rehearsed, not felt. He had already chosen which version of the truth he was willing to accept. And what exactly does Clara say? I asked quietly. He hesitated for half a second, then pushed forward. She says you've been manipulating Dad for years. That you made him think she was trying to push you out. That you poisoned his mind. I let the words settle between us. Then I asked, do you believe that? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I nodded slowly. I see. Mom, I'm just trying to understand, he said, softer now, but still defensive. This doesn't make sense. The company was supposed to be mine. I've been working there. Yes, I interrupted gently. Working. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It isn't. He blinked, thrown off. I'm not saying that to hurt you, Mark, I continued. I'm saying it because it's the truth. Your father gave you that position because he wanted to help you, not because you earned it. That's not true, he snapped, but there was less conviction now. You were let go from 3 jobs before that, I said calmly. He didn't want to see you fail again. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen before turning back to me. You're twisting things. No, I said quietly. I'm finally saying them out loud. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The kettle whistled softly behind me, but I didn't move to turn it off. The sound filled the space between us like pressure building. Then Mark said something that cut deeper than the rest. Clara says you've always resented her. I looked at him carefully. And what do you think? He swallowed. I think you never accepted her. I let out a slow breath. I accepted her the day you chose her, I said. What I didn't accept was how she treated me. She never treated you badly, he insisted, but his voice lacked certainty. Mark, I said gently, she made sure I wasn't invited to holidays. She scheduled family trips when she knew I couldn't come. She told people I was forgetful, unstable. Do you really believe that's kindness? He opened his mouth,
Closed it again.
I turned away from him and walked toward Daniel's study. For a second, I hesitated at the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. This room still felt like his. Like stepping into it without him should require permission. But I stepped inside anyway. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out the folder. When I returned to the kitchen, Mark was standing exactly where I had left him. What's that? He asked. Something your father prepared, I said. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. Photographs, printed emails, documents, carefully organized, carefully dated, carefully undeniable. Mark frowned as he looked down. What is this supposed to prove? I didn't answer. Instead, I took out my phone and pressed play. Clara's voice filled the room.
Clear.
Unmistakable. I swear, once Daniel's gone, everything will finally be ours. Anna won't know what hit her. Mark froze. The color drained from his face. That's not. I played another. She's getting older. It won't be hard to convince people she's losing it. A doctor here, a few conversations there will have control in no time. Mark staggered back slightly, as if the words had physically hit him. No, he whispered. No, she wouldn't. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was already speaking for itself. The front door opened again. Softer this time. Controlled. Clara stepped into the kitchen. She stopped the moment she saw the table. The papers. The phone.
Mark. Me.
What is going on? She asked, her tone carefully measured. The truth, I said. Her eyes flicked to Mark. Don't tell me you're actually entertaining this. He didn't respond. That was all it took. Something in her expression shifted. The mask cracked. Those recordings are fake, she said quickly. Edited. Taken out of context. There are dozens of them, I replied calmly. Over several years. She turned to Mark, stepping closer. You know how easy it is to manipulate things like this. She's always been clever in her own way. Mark looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, he didn't defend her. Was it you? He asked quietly. Clara laughed, but it sounded forced. Of course not. The voice, he said. That's your voice. Silence. Just for a second, but long enough. And in that moment, everything began to fall apart. Clara straightened, her expression hardening completely now. You're making a mistake, she said coldly. Both of you. No, I said softly. We already made that mistake. Mark sank into a chair, staring at the table, at the evidence, at the truth he could no longer avoid. And I stood there, watching my son finally see what had been in front of him all along. The truth settled between us again, heavy but honest. No, he admitted finally. I probably would have told her, and she would have convinced me you were lying. I nodded. That's what your father thought too. That seemed to hit him harder than anything else. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He knew, and he didn't tell me. He hoped you'd see it on your own, I said. He didn't want to destroy your marriage. He wanted to protect what he could. Mark closed his eyes. And now it's destroyed anyway. There was no comfort I could offer that would make that statement untrue. Sometimes, I said slowly, things don't break because someone else damages them. Sometimes they break because they were never built on something strong enough to last. He didn't respond, but I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his shoulders sank just slightly lower. That night, Mark didn't leave. He didn't say he was staying, but when I came downstairs later, I saw a blanket folded on the couch, a glass of water on the coffee table. He had made himself a place without asking, like a child returning to somewhere he once felt safe. I didn't mention it. Instead, I turned off the lights and went back upstairs. For the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't feel completely alone in the house. The next morning, I woke early as always. Old habits don't disappear just because life changes. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and let the sunlight fill the kitchen. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then I heard footsteps. Mark entered, looking like he hadn't slept much. Morning, he said quietly. Good morning. He hesitated before sitting down. I've been thinking. I gave a small smile. That's usually a good start. He managed a faint one in return, then grew serious again. I don't think I can stay with Clara. The words hung in the air. Not dramatic, not loud, but final. I understand, I said. She called me 10 times last night, he continued. Texted, left messages, first angry, then apologetic, then angry again. He shook his head. It's like I'm seeing everything differently now. Things that used to make sense suddenly don't. That's what clarity does, I said. It doesn't change the past. It changes how you understand it. He nodded slowly. I think I ignored a lot, he admitted. There were moments, little things. The way she'd talk about you when you weren't around. The way she'd twist conversations. I always had a reason to explain it away. Because it was easier, I said. Yeah, he agreed quietly. It was easier. We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was rebuilding. Careful, fragile, but real. A few days passed like that. Clara didn't come back, but her presence lingered in other ways. Calls, messages, emails, most of them directed at Mark, some even sent to me. I didn't respond to any of them. Mark, at first, tried to answer. Tried to explain. Tried to fix something that no longer existed. Eventually, he stopped. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard, standing near the old oak tree Daniel had planted years ago. His hands were in his pockets, his gaze distant. He used to say this tree would outlive all of us, Mark said as I approached. He was probably right, I replied. Mark smiled faintly. He always was. We stood there for a moment, looking at the branches swaying gently in the breeze. I talked to a lawyer today, he said. I turned slightly toward him. About the divorce? He nodded.
Yeah.
I think it's the only way forward. I didn't react immediately. Not because I was surprised, but because I understood the weight behind those words. Are you sure? I asked softly. He let out a slow breath.
No.
But I'm sure I can't go back to what it was. That was enough. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily. Mark moved into the guest room upstairs. Not as a permanent decision, but as a step. We didn't discuss how long he would stay. We didn't need to. The house began to feel different again. Lighter, warmer. Not because Daniel was gone, that absence would always remain, but because something else had returned. Honesty. One evening, we sat in the living room going through old photo albums. It had been years since anyone had opened them. This was our trip to the coast, Mark said, pointing at a faded picture. I remember Dad dropping the camera in the sand and blaming the wind. I added with a small laugh. Mark smiled. A real one this time. I miss him, he said quietly. So do I. We didn't need to say more. Then his expression shifted again. Mom, do you think he knew it would turn out like this? I thought about that carefully. Not exactly like this, I said. But he knew enough to prepare. Mark nodded slowly. He protected you. Yes, I said. And in a way, he protected you too. He looked at me, uncertain.
How?
He made sure you'd have time, I explained. Time to see things clearly. Time to decide for yourself who you want to be. Mark didn't respond right away, but I saw something in his eyes. Understanding. That night, after he went upstairs, I stayed in the living room a little longer. The house was quiet again, but this time, it felt like healing. Because sometimes losing everything you thought you had is the only way to find what truly matters. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. Time didn't fix everything, but it softened the edges. Weeks passed, then months, and the house slowly transformed, not just in appearance, but in atmosphere. It no longer felt like a place where I was being pushed out or watched from the corners. It felt like mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. And strangely, it began to feel like Mark's again too, though in a different way than before, not as someone passing through under someone else's influence, but as someone rediscovering where he came from. The divorce process, however, was anything but soft. Clara didn't disappear quietly. That would have been too simple, too graceful for someone like her. Instead, she fought everything. Every document, every detail, every clause became a battlefield. According to Mark, she shifted tactics constantly. One day she wanted reconciliation, the next she accused him of emotional neglect, and the day after that she demanded compensation that had no basis in reality. She's saying she's entitled to half of everything, Mark told me one evening as we sat in the kitchen. Paperwork spread between us, including the house. I raised an eyebrow slightly. The house she tried to remove me from? He let out a tired breath.
Yes.
That house. And what did your lawyer say? That she doesn't have a claim, he replied. The will is clear. The trust protects the rest. I nodded. Daniel had been thorough, painfully, brilliantly thorough. At the time, I hadn't fully understood the extent of what he was doing. Now I saw it with perfect clarity. He hadn't just written a will. He had built a structure. one designed to withstand pressure, manipulation, and time. Still, that didn't stop Clara from trying. She's also been calling people, Mark continued. Family, friends, even some of my colleagues. She's telling them I abandoned her, that you turned me against her. I wasn't surprised. Clara had always understood one thing very well. Control wasn't just about actions, it was about narrative. If she couldn't control the situation anymore, she would try to control how it was perceived. And does it matter? I asked calmly. Mark hesitated. It used to. And now? He looked at me for a moment, then shook his head. Now I just want it to be over. Despite everything, I didn't feel anger toward her anymore. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I had spent too many years letting her presence define how I felt in my own life. Now she didn't. And that was a kind of freedom I hadn't expected. One Saturday afternoon, something unexpected happened.
The doorbell rang.
I wasn't expecting anyone, so I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it. When I opened the door, I found Emma and Jacob standing on the porch, both holding small backpacks. Behind them, in the driveway, was Mark's ex-wife, Linda, giving a polite wave before getting back into her car and driving off. "Grandma," Jacob said with a grin, stepping forward. Emma followed more quietly, but her eyes were observant, thoughtful. "Is it okay if we stay for the weekend?" she asked. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It had been so long since the house felt like a place for children again. So long since laughter had filled the rooms without being carefully monitored or controlled. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "It's more than okay." Their presence changed everything. The house, which had been slowly healing, suddenly felt alive again. Jacob moved through it like he already owned every corner, asking questions, opening doors, rediscovering spaces that had been closed off for years. Emma was more reserved, but she noticed everything. The new curtains, the rearranged furniture, the subtle changes that marked a new beginning. "Did you redecorate?" she asked later as we stood in the living room. "A little," I said. "It feels different," she added. "Does it feel worse?" She shook her head. "No." "Better." That one word stayed with me. Better. That evening, Mark joined us for dinner, and for the first time in years, it felt like a real family moment. Not forced. Not managed. Just natural. We ordered simple food, sat around the table, talked about small things, school, work, old memories. There was laughter. Real laughter. At one point, I caught Mark watching the children with a look I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. Later that night, after Emma and Jacob had gone to their rooms, Emma came back downstairs quietly. She found me in the kitchen, putting away dishes. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Was Clara always like that? Children see more than we think. I dried my hands slowly. "Clara and I didn't always understand each other," I said carefully. Emma studied me. "Dad seems different now." "In a good way?" She nodded. "Yeah." "Lighter." I smiled slightly. Sometimes people don't realize how much weight they're carrying until it's gone. Emma seemed to think about that. "She used to say you didn't like us visiting," she added quietly. My chest tightened. "That was never true," I said gently. "Not even for a second." Emma nodded, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "I thought so," she said. That weekend stayed with me. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was simple. And after everything that had happened, simplicity felt like a gift. A few days later, I was in the garden, planting new flowers, when I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. Clara stepped out. She looked exactly the same, composed, elegant, controlled. But something was different. There was tension in the way she held herself, not visible to most people.
But I saw it.
I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my hands. "This is unexpected," I said. She walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. "I wanted to talk," she said. I waited. "I think we can come to an agreement," she continued. "This doesn't have to be dragged out." "And what kind of agreement are you suggesting?" She lifted her chin slightly. "A financial one. A compensation in exchange for cooperation." I almost smiled. Even now, she thought everything could be negotiated, bought, controlled. "You still don't understand," I said calmly. Her expression hardened. "I understand perfectly. You think you've won." I shook my head slightly.
No.
"I think this was never a competition." For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, something else. Insecurity. But it vanished quickly. "I'm not leaving empty-handed," she said coldly. "That's not my decision," I replied. "It's the result of your actions." We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then she turned and walked back to her car without another word.
No dramatic exit.
No final threat, just departure. As I watched her drive away, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of her anymore, not even a little. And that was the moment I truly understood what Daniel had given me. Not just protection, not just security, but the chance to live without fear. And that was worth everything. A year passed more quietly than I ever expected. Not empty, never empty, but steady. The kind of time that doesn't rush or drag, just moves forward with a quiet certainty. Seasons changed outside my windows, and with them, something inside me shifted too. Grief didn't disappear, but it softened, becoming less like a sharp pain and more like a deep, familiar presence I had learned to carry without breaking under its weight. The house had changed, not in ways that erased Daniel, but in ways that made space for me. I painted the kitchen a soft green the first had always loved, but never chosen because he preferred darker tones. I replaced the heavy curtains in the living room with lighter ones that let the sunlight pour in during the afternoons. I rearranged furniture, opened spaces, cleared corners that had once felt crowded with compromise. And yet, Daniel was still everywhere. In the worn armchair by the window, where he used to sit every evening. In the small imperfections he never got around to fixing. In the garden, where the flowers bloomed exactly as he had planned them years ago. It wasn't a house without him. It was a house that still held him, just no longer defined entirely by his presence. Mark stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because, slowly, this became a place where he wanted to be again. At first, he kept to himself more, spending long hours working, taking calls, dealing with the final stages of the divorce. But over time, that distance faded. We found a rhythm. Simple things at first, morning coffee together, quiet dinners, occasional conversations that no longer felt forced or fragile. Then more shared projects around the house, discussions about the business, even moments of laughter that didn't feel out of place anymore. The company had been another unexpected shift. When I first stepped into Daniel's office after everything, I felt like I was entering a world that no longer belonged to me. But piece by piece, memory returned. I remembered the early days, working beside him, helping organize accounts, managing clients, building something from nothing. I wasn't as removed from it as Clara had assumed. Not even close. Mark noticed that too. "You understand this better than I thought," he admitted one afternoon as we reviewed documents together. "I helped build it," I reminded him gently. He nodded, a little embarrassed. "I guess I never really saw that." "You're seeing a lot of things differently now," I said. He didn't argue. The divorce was finalized 3 months after Clara's visit. It ended not with a dramatic courtroom scene, but with a quiet legal conclusion. She received a settlement, fair, but far from what she had demanded. The trust Daniel had created held firm, just as intended. The house remained mine. The company remained mine. And Clara moved on. Mark told me she relocated to another city, already involved in a new relationship, already building a new narrative somewhere else. I didn't feel anger when I heard that. Only distance, like hearing about a storm that had passed far away. On the 1-year anniversary of Daniel's death, I decided to do something I hadn't thought I would ever be ready for. I invited everyone for dinner. Not a memorial, not a mourning, a gathering, a celebration of what had been and what still remained. I spent the entire day preparing, cooking dishes Daniel loved, setting the table with our best china, the one we had received decades ago and saved for special occasions that we often forgot to define. I arranged flowers from the garden in the center, fresh, bright, alive. When the doorbell rang, I felt a small flicker of nervousness. Not fear, just the anticipation. Martha arrived first, warm and familiar as always. Then Mark, followed by Emma and Jacob, who filled the house with energy the moment they stepped inside. Even Linda came, something that would have been unthinkable not so long ago. We gathered around the table. For a moment, no one sat. It was as if we all felt the same thing, the absence at the head of it. Daniel's place. I hesitated only briefly. Then I walked to that seat.
And sat down.
Not to replace him, but to continue. Mark raised his glass first. To Dad, he said, his voice steady, but filled with meaning. For everything he taught me, even the lessons I didn't understand at the time. Martha followed. To my brother, who always knew more than he said. Emma and Jacob echoed softly. To Grandpa. All eyes turned to me. I lifted my glass. To Daniel, I said, who saw clearly, loved deeply, and made sure we would find our way, even when he wasn't here to guide us. Glasses touched. The sound was soft, but it carried. Dinner was not perfect. It wasn't meant to be. There were pauses, moments where memories surfaced unexpectedly, where silence briefly returned. But there was also laughter, stories, connection, something real. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I walked through the house slowly, turning off lights one by one. The quiet had returned, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt complete. I stopped in the living room, standing beside Daniel's chair. For a moment, I placed my hand on its worn armrest, tracing the familiar curve where his hand had rested countless times. You've thought of everything, I said softly into the stillness. And somehow, I could almost hear his answer. Not in words, but in the certainty he had always carried. I looked around the room, at the walls, at the light, at the life that was still here. I was no longer just someone's wife, no longer just someone's mother. Those roles would always be part of me, but they were no longer all of me. I was Anna, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Before going upstairs, I paused by the hallway mirror. For a second, I studied my reflection, not searching for who I had been, but recognizing who I had become, stronger,
Clearer. Free.
and as I turned off the last light and made my way to bed, I realized something simple, something Daniel had always known long before I did. Life doesn't end when everything changes. Sometimes, that's exactly where it begins.